Good evening. We're about to start the meeting. Welcome everybody to Scrutiny Panel 3 Children's Services. I'm your chair for this evening, Councillor Hoden Haley. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I also would like to welcome the members for the Health and Adult Social Services for this evening. The meeting is also being live streamed on YouTube, and members who are online, please make sure you're mute and you raise the hand icon if you would like to speak. Item 1, we have few apologies. We have Councillor Ballerini Hashani, who's not able to be here this evening, Councillor Terp Sidhu. We also got Councillor Greg Stafford, who's been substituted by Councillor Fabio Conti. Thank you very much. Item 2, there are no urgent matters. Item 3, there are no matters to be considered in private. Item 4, do any of the members have any declaration of interest to make or any personal interest to declare?
I should just declare that I'm employed by the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and we do regulate mental health nurses. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wesson. Item 5, will all the members read the minutes? Can we agree the minutes that was held on 25th of January? Can we agree for accuracy? It's all agreed. Right, so item 6. This evening we'll be discussing children and young people's emotional and well-being and mental health services. We have item that's been provided an update and overview for the children and young people's emotional well-being and mental health service in Ealing. This report will provide to the children's mental health, well-being and resilience scrutiny panel in 2022. We have Eamon Davlin, who's a project officer and adults public health, will be speaking about the report this evening. So Eamon, I'll pass that to you as well, please.
Thank you, Councillor Haley. First of all, I'd like to ask my colleague, Dr. Robinson, to set out the strategic picture of services and our challenges.
Hello, everybody. I think Eamon's going to share my slides, so we'll just bring them up. That's okay.
Yep.
Okay, so if we could go on to the next slide. That's right, Eamon. So hello, everybody. My name is Tamsin Robinson, and I'm an Ealing resident. I'm an Ealing mum, and I'm also a GP who practices in Ealing. And I also hold a number of different roles with Ealing ICB, such as I'm the children's lead, but I'm here to talk to you in my hat, with my hat on, I'm the North West London ICB clinical lead, children and young people's mental health lead. So what does that mean? Well, as you can see from the diagram, North West London ICB is the NHS organisation that's responsible for planning healthcare across 8 boroughs of North West London. And together with our partners, who are our local authority partners across the 8 boroughs, our providers and voluntary sector organisations, we form ourselves into a North West London ICS Children and Young People's Mental Health Steering Group. And I've come to talk to you about the work that we're doing as partners across North West London and how that has ramifications and advantages to Ealing. So if we go on to the next slide, if that's okay. So I'm sure you're aware that 20% of our population are children, but they're incredibly important members of our population because they make up 100% of our future. And I'm going to start my presentation by just doing a bit of a quote from the NHS long-term plan, because I think it illustrates the importance of partnership. So it says the health, and I would say the mental health and the physical health of children and young people is determined by far more than just healthcare. Housing, income, education, stable and loving families, and a healthy environment all have massive, significant influences on children and young people's health and life chances. And so I think this quote really reaches into the presentation I'm going to talk about over the next 5 minutes by just saying that we need to work as partners with the children and families of Ealing to ensure that we are providing services to support children's health, including mental health. Do you want to move the slide on, please, Eamon? So across Northwest London, we have approximately 500,000 children living in our 8 boroughs. And there's a kind of slightly conservative estimate, which says about 20% of them will have a diagnosable mental health disorder, but that could actually reach up to maybe even 40% or perhaps even more. And what we've been noticing, even before the pandemic, but certainly after the pandemic, mental health is becoming more of an issue for our children and young people. The complexity of the problems that people are presenting with are certainly increasing, as are the severity of their symptoms. And talking to children and young people in the borough of Ealing and across Northwest London, they've really told us that actually they want us to provide they want us to tell us what's possible and available within our areas to support children and families. And we want to see kind of common sense solutions and differences that are really felt on the ground. And the only way we're going to be able to provide that is by working together with our children and their parents and across the local authority, the NHS, and our voluntary sector services. So let's move on. So what have we been doing at kind of Northwest London level? Well, we've got very high ambitions to provide better mental health and wellbeing services for every child living in Northwest London. And that means by developing services which meet the needs of people with complex needs, such as those with learning disabilities and autism, but also those families and children who have experienced barriers to getting services, such as deprivation and cultural norms, together with kind of complex needs. So we've been looking at different ways to improve services for our children and young people. I'm going to talk about what Thrive framework, which is the first blue rectangle on the screen, in a second. So I'll just leave it there. But I just want to mention that that's about providing kind of needs-led support. We've been doing quite a lot of work about supporting primary care, so that's GPs, to improve the services and their training level to provide care for children and young people. We've been working quite hard with rolling out mental health support teams in schools. And I'm really pleased to say that in Ealing, by the end of this year, 100% of our state schools are going to be have access to a mental health support team in school. And nationally, that's absolutely fantastic. And across Northwest London, by the end of the year, we're going to have 10 schools which are not linked to a mental health support team in school, but we've made a commitment to provide them with additional support. We've been doing a lot of work with Anna Freud, with West London in Ealing, and with other trusts across Northwest London to improve the core community mental health support children and young people receive. We've been doing a lot of work looking at how to improve our crisis response. And I'm going to talk a little bit in a second about the Circle, which is a crisis prevention cafe for children and young people. In fact, it's the only one in the whole country, and it's based just down the road in Ealing. And also, we are going to be talking about the work that we've been doing to improve our offer in terms of neurodevelopmental assessment and support for children with ADHD or autism. We realise that children in Ealing are waiting far too long for those services. And this year we put in, across Northwest London, an additional 3.8 million into those pathways, and that is an ongoing commitment. So let's change slides, that's okay. So looking forward, we've looked at the next couple of years of our work, and we've chosen some priority areas. And this is at North West London level, but these will filter into the work that's being done in Ealing as well. We've made a real commitment to be much better at hearing the voices of our service users, the children who are using our services, and working with parents much more. And we will be doing a lot of co-designing of our offer with those children and young people. We will be working in an iThrive way, and I'll just again delay talking about that for a second. We've got ongoing improvement in our mental health support teams in schools. So not only are we actually rolling those out, but we're actually looking at what they're offering. This year, we asked Young Minds to do a pupil review into the kind of offer that children and young people are receiving through our mental health support teams in schools and how we can improve those. We've been doing a huge amount of work recently looking at our crisis prevention. So we don't want children and young people presenting in mental health crisis to our A&E departments. I don't know if any of you have been to our A&E departments recently, but that is not somewhere that you would want to be if you were a child with behavioural or mental health issues. So we're looking at trying to avoid crisis prevention by looking upstream, by using centres such as the Circle, but also by providing much more support in early intervention. And then we're looking at those children who have presented in a much more in-depth way to stop them re-presenting. We're also improving the mental health offer to children and young people whilst they're in acute trusts. I've mentioned that we're doing a huge amount of work, and we've made a massive investment into our neurodevelopmental pathway, and that's a really exciting piece of work. We're looking at how to improve our Waiting Well offer. We put a lot of money into third sector organisations to provide the kind of support that children and young people and their parents have said that they want. And we're looking at bringing teams or professionals such as community developmental teams together with CAMS colleagues to improve the offer to our children and young people. We've identified care experienced children or looked after children to be a group that we're going to put increased kind of energy and scrutiny into, and making sure that we are meeting their mental health needs in a better and more lined up way. And we're also looking at our offer to the children in the Youth Justice Service and improving the mental health support that children presenting in those settings are receiving. So this is really exciting work. Would you like to move on? So I mentioned Thrive transformation, and I'll just run through that very quickly. So on the left of the slide, you can see a yellow triangle and then the kind of tiers, and that's the previous iteration of how we delivered our mental health support. It was a very hierarchical way of delivering it. People became very tribal and they worked in silos. And wherever you get teams who are just discreetly working within those teams, you get the possibility of children and young people falling between the cracks of services and being perhaps too complicated for one and not complicated enough for another. And therefore you get a lot of unmet need. So we're moving towards a Thrive-like way, and this is a consistent change across North West London. So something that's happening in Ealing, but across our 8 boroughs. So as you can see, the multicolored diagram is based on a circle, and we want you to think that the children and their families are sitting within the yellow circle, and that they are ideally thriving in life. And then we are reorganizing the way that we are providing services to wrap around that child and young person in a joined up needs-led approach. So stopping working in silos and specifically just in teams, and working across teams to provide support that meets a child's need. And we're all working in the same way to prevent children escalating and bringing them back into the thriving position. So if we just go to the next slide, if that's okay. So what does this mean? Well, so as you can see, the left-hand diagram is the classic one, but the right-hand diagram is kind of what that actually means. So we want to kind of in the getting help, green little lozenge, that's where kind of school nurses, health visitors, GPs sit. If they're coming across children and young people with need, then they will be kind of signposting. So if you hop across to the other diagram, they're kind of signposting and offering support, which is readily available either digitally or through third sector organisations. Then you move into the kind of getting help, and that's where the Anna Freud Safe Evolve service sits mainly, which is providing goal-focused kind of evidence-based mental health support. Then following the diagram round, you're getting the kind of getting more help element, and that's really where the West London Trust provision of specialist CAMs sits, offering kind of more intensive kind of multi-systemic offer. And then going round into the red section, these are children who are kind of getting towards kind of a much more severe mental health kind of need, and we're providing risk support, so eating disorder services, and crisis sits there. And that's really where the Circle Crisis Prevention Cafe sits. And then even more into the orange section, you've got the inpatient mental health service that the West London provide. So let's flip. So this is just another diagram to help you try to explain to you how the services are going to alter. So if you can imagine the children and families in this diagram being the kind of center of planets whizzing around them in concentric circles, we want to stop services just working in a discrete way. We want services to be able to provide care, so multiple services providing care that actually meets those families' need in a consistent, coordinated way, rather than just saying, oh, sorry, you're in this service, you can only receive this now and then wait and be referred to another service. We want services to work together to support the whole family and the whole child at the same time. And then finally, my last slide, I'm going to take you back to this idea of partnership. So I brought up, and this is not going to be I'm going to miss somebody out on this slide, but I just wanted to describe to you visually the breadth of offer from a mental health perspective that our children and young people in Ealing have, and all the different players that come into a play to support those children. And our job in the next couple of years is to make this an easy map to navigate, and for everybody to know who everybody else is on that map. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Tamsin. Joe, if you could go next.
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Jo Manley. I'm director at West London Trust, and I have a particular sort of role in some of our integrated working and partnership working. I am the chair of the Children and Young People's, what we've just renamed the Healthy Minds Group for Ealing, and we are a subgroup of the Children and Young People's Partnership Board. So all those logos that Tamsin put up there are the groups of people that we're trying to bring together to consider how we develop that Thrive model here in Ealing. If I tell you that I think when I started, there were probably about a dozen people coming to the group, and I think we now have 35 to 40 and are starting to think about how do we streamline it, because there's just so much interest in this area and so much enthusiasm. And I have to say, I've been really bowled over by people's spirit of wanting to make the experience of children in Ealing a better one and a healthier one. So it's a really positive group. We've been spending a lot of time having presentations from the different partners, because part of this is about just finding out about each other. But I think our big challenge now is how do we make sure that our children and their families are guided through that whole myriad of services and we get people into the right place at the right time. So that's very much one of our priorities for this coming year. We're looking at a central point of access and how we might develop that. There's also a lot of interest in that group in thinking about the review of school provision and just making sure we're identifying where there are gaps and where there are potentially overlaps in the services we offer. I'm sure all of you are aware that, you know, that's often the case. We sometimes have people that don't get anything and other people that are potentially known to more than one service. So it's just about how do we organise ourselves to really get that best integrated care for our young people. So I just wanted to let you know that that work's going on, and I'm going to pass over now to the people that actually do some of our fabulous services. So I think it's over to Cara and Ari.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Irene Brown-Martin. I'm the head of service for Safe Evolve. So Safe Evolve is a team of child and family specialists and wellbeing practitioners. It's a early intervention emotional wellbeing service provided by the Anna Freud, commissioned by London Borough of Ealing, working in partnership with Northwest London ICB. It's a replacement service for the community camp support and a new approach to mental health support for children and young people in Ealing. I'm just going to talk a bit about the key performances since the Anna Freud took over back in April. In April, when the service was transferred to the Anna Freud, we had 519 families transferred to the Anna Freud from the predecessor. Currently, there's less than 40 of the original transferred families still await interventions. Waitlist currently is at 295, including new referrals since April 2023. Since April 2023, we've received 338 new referrals. We've conducted 271 assessments, 1,491 one-to-one therapeutic interventions, provided 287 professional consultations to safe practitioners. We've provided 258 consultations to families, including safety calls, and we have closed 234 cases with a combination of outcomes. Referrals to the service is we currently sit between two single points of access. So we sit in the CAMS, SPA, as well as ECHAs. Currently, 93% of our referrals to the service comes from via CAMS. We also have weekly escalation meetings with CAMS where we discuss cases. If we've been working with a young person and the presentation becomes above threshold for tier 2, we have a weekly meeting with CAMS where we discuss, and those cases are transferred to CAMS. And if a young person is under CAMS and they've conducted an assessment and felt that the treatment would be best placed in tier 2, the young person is then transferred to our service through that escalation process. Our treatment model is based on short-term evidence-based intervention between 6 to 8 sessions for moderate to for mild to moderate presentation. We also offer between 18 to 12 sessions for more moderate to severe mental health difficulties. And we've had to extend our treatment model to 12 sessions because over the course of the year, we've noticed a significant amount of young people who are needing more longer interventions. The therapeutic intervention is based on a range of evidence-based approaches for low mood, anxiety, behavioral difficulties, as well as emotional regulations interventions. We offer one-to-one individual direct therapy to young people over the age of 11. Based on a guided self-help approach, we offer therapeutic group interventions, workshops for parents and young people, as well as for schools. Most of our intervention is based on psychological education as well for parents and for young people, any other trusted adults who are working with the young person. We offer focused interventions. Our parent-led interventions are offered for children who are under the age of 11. We also work with the professional network. So we offer consultations for practitioners who work in SAFE. So for example, if they're working with a family and we're also working with the family, we tend to work collaboratively. We work jointly to offer the intervention. We also offer consultations to parents and any trusted adult who is working with the young person. I think I've already talked about that. Our work is with excuse me. Yeah, we've also worked. We've done some work with children's centres in order to offer face-to-face sessions in exchange for training and consultations. And to evidence our work, we use outcome measures, for example, the OUTCAS, the SQ, goal-based outcomes, as a way of measuring if the intervention is effective. Currently, we've been offering group interventions. We've done some workshops around self-harm, transitioning from primary to secondary school, parenting and prevention, adolescent anxiety groups, low mood, and as well as low mood groups. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Cyrene. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm the clinical lead for the schools branch of Irene's team. So it's slightly different. So I'm just going to talk through what that looks like. It's a small team, so there's me and a few other colleagues that you can see below. And basically, there's two teams. So I'm going to talk about the Ealing Primary Centre first. So the Ealing Primary Centre, a lot of you are probably familiar. It's an alternate provision for children in primary school who have been excluded from mainstream, and they're often on dual placement. So it's kind of a multidisciplinary team made up of education staff and mental health workers who kind of work to support children and try to prevent those who are experiencing social, emotional, and behavioural difficulties from being excluded from mainstream school. So we get referrals from schools. They can buy in an assessment or an intervention package for specific children where they are worried that the child within the mainstream school is at risk of exclusion. So that's kind of often looks like behavioural difficulties, but as one can imagine, that's our role is to then unpick and understand what that behaviour is relating to. Tends to be quite complex attachment difficulties, anxiety, trauma, a lot of undiagnosed neurodevelopmental difficulties, which then we will assess and make recommendations and try to support the school to support that child. We tend not to work with children with existing ASD diagnoses because there are other teams who are better placed to do that. However, we get a high level of undiagnosed autistic young people coming into the service. So all mainstream primary schools in Ealing can refer to the Ealing Primary Centre. Some refer a lot and some less so. And like I said, our job is then to kind of pull together a detailed assessment and understanding of the child's presentation and difficulties and to make recommendations to the school, to the parents and to the network around the child. A lot of our work feeds into the EHCP process if that is necessary for that child. We will also support the staff in school and if needed, also we can offer an intervention package for that child. So the other team is called CLIPS. That's the other team that I run, clinical professionals in schools. So this is when schools across Ealing can choose to buy in a therapist. That school is then allocated a therapist who is on site 1 day a week across the whole academic year. The current schools that are buying in are listed for you. So there's 3 primaries and 3 secondaries who are currently buying into the CLIPS team. Referrals are made from we have a link person who's identified within that school, usually the SENCO or an assistant head or someone who's in charge of inclusion. The referrals are made directly from that school, directly to the clinician who's based in the school. And we very much become part of the school. So we are very present, we're very kind of seen and visible, and we form good relationships with the school staff and with the pupils. Referrals are for a range of presenting difficulties, and we tend to sit between essentially Safe Evolve, which is Irene's team, and CAMS. So we would pick up the more complex cases that might require longer term interventions. We can hold a certain level of risk, but of course, if we're very concerned, then we would then escalate to CAMS. The kind of work that the CLIPS team does is a lot of assessment work, including observations, parent interviews, teacher interviews, kind of, again, pulling together an understanding of the child so that we can then support the school staff to support the young person, but also we might be directly working with the young person. We can provide one-to-one interventions, brief or longer term. So again, we can kind of sit between being early intervention, but also maybe picking up some of the cases that maybe haven't engaged in other services that have been offered. It's a lot about prevention, about early intervention. We do a lot of parent care work. We do a lot of case consultations. So we support the staff to understand the children and provide a psychological understanding of the difficulties. We also do a lot of training within the school, attend meetings, safeguarding meetings, group work. We also like to take a whole school approach. So the idea is to not just be in a room with a young person, but try to maybe go into a classroom and provide an intervention for a whole class of children around, for example, transition or exam stress or something like that. We also like to offer support to the staff. So a number of myself and a number of my colleagues are currently offering supervision of school staff or staff reflective practice for supporting the staff who are on a daily basis having to kind of manage, really complex children who are presenting with a lot of mental health and emotional difficulties. And then we're in a good place to also hopefully help that child with onward referrals if necessary. So to support them to get the extra help that they might need. This was just a table that I thought just to break down, because it can be quite confusing, all the different teams that are found in schools. So this kind of breaks down CLIPS that I've talked about, EPC that I've talked about, MHST that Tamsin talked about, and then the EP service, which also goes into schools. So it's just maybe helpful to see all of the different teams that are going into schools.
Thank you, Sarah. If I could ask Kara to speak now.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Kaya Joshi. I'm the Associate Director for the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services at West London NHS Trust, traditionally abbreviated as CAMS. My role is really to take overarching operational responsibility for the smooth and safe running of those services within our organisation. And I work closely alongside our clinical director in doing so, who oversees things clinically. I thought I don't have any fancy slides, I'm sorry. So you're just going to have to listen to me. But most of what I'm talking about today is captured within the report that you have in your papers. So I thought I'd start and just say that although we'd noted and Tamsin introduced our approach to the Thrive model, the way we are describing these services is actually very much tier-based, because that's how we're currently commissioned and that's how the services do operate. So I'll start talking you through some of our tier 2 services and then up to that tier 4 section of the quadrant. So in terms of our tier 2 services, the main change since we last presented to Scrutiny panel in 2022 is that we no longer run the bulk of tier 2 services within the borough now. So our colleagues at the Anna Freud, it was a re-procurement exercise, and they now run those services. We do work closely alongside them, and one of the things we were keen to do from the point of procurement is not create another door for people to access another referral pathway. So as you heard, the majority of referrals to the Safe Service do flow through CAMS. So we have that central point of access for the children and young people's mental wellbeing aspects of the service. A couple of the services we do run, so we do still continue to employ clinical psychologists that work alongside and embedded within the council run services. So one is the looked after children's teams, MAST and LAC. And also there's a placement breakdown service for those with learning disabilities. In addition, the Trust continue to run the mental health in schools teams, which has been referred to in various elements of the slide. We run what is often traditionally known as CAMS, and it's the specialist CAMS services that run out of the Armstrong Way site, largely, which is the site by the Iron Bridge in Southall. So we have different teams involved in that, but they're usually the tier 3 end of the spectrum that we would say. So those that need specialist, usually medical or a multidisciplinary team intervention. So we work alongside psychiatrists as well as other forms of therapeutic staff. The Trust in West London also hosts what is known as the North West London CAMS Provider Collaborative, which is actually, although it's a provider collaborative, is a commissioning function. And it's a devolved responsibility from NHS England to manage the allocation of the CAMS inpatient unit beds for the North West London sector. So they commission and provide the bed management function for those at the higher end of need in our pathways. So I thought I'd talk you through just a little bit about the different tiers and the services that we provide. So of the tier 2 services, particularly with MHST, Tamsin noted that by the end of 2024, early 2025, we should be having a mental health support team worker embedded within all mainstream schools in Ealing. And if I'm not mistaken, that will be the first borough nationally to achieve that. So it's really, really something positive for Ealing. And that's with the aid of North West London commissioning a 4th team to work in the borough. So originally what was known as the Trailblazer programme, each borough was assigned only 1 or 2 teams, and building on the successes of those teams, we've been able to secure a 4th team for Ealing going forward, which allows us to reach all of those mainstream schools, as we said. In terms of the more traditional tier 3 services that we run from the Trust, we split our services into 4 main teams, really. There's a child and family team that supports children up until the age of 13 or 14. That then transitions into an adolescent team, which looks after children from 14 until their 18th birthdays. And we also have specialist neurodevelopmental, which look after autism spectrum conditions and ADHD, other things like tic disorders, and also a specialist learning disability team, which looks after the mental health needs of those with learning disabilities. In terms of some of the things we've got going on in those services, I think demand is the biggest issue that we're facing at the moment. We're not really sure why. There's a lot going on out in the wider world, post-COVID-19, the cost of living crisis. There's a lot of things that are worrying our populations, and those things, you know, transcend down into families and into worries and anxieties that children hold. So there's a lot going on in society that kind of means that the demand for these services across both children's and adults, actually, in mental health, has significantly increased since the end of the pandemic. Despite that rise in demand, we're still managing just about to meet most of our key performance indicators. So in terms of targets that are set nationally for the NHS, there is an access target assigned and associated with each borough of the number of children and young people we should be supporting at any given time in a rolling 12-month period based on the prevalence figures. We are currently meeting those access targets in Ealing. In fact, we are meeting those across North West London. So another positive there. One thing we've particularly noticed is, as well as the demand, it's the complexity and the acuity that's really growing. So the number of comorbid conditions, children aren't just anxious anymore, children are anxious and presenting with depression. So there's multiple things going on in these young people's lives that's creating a relatively complex picture. There's rising demands in the eating disorders pathways, for example. That's a particular challenge for us at the moment. One of the things that we struggle with alongside national is our waiting times for the neurodevelopmental and the learning disabilities pathway. The last time we presented to Scrutiny in 2022, there was an ongoing project to reduce what was over 300 children and young people on our neurodevelopmental waiting list. That was a successful project. We cleared about 268 from that waiting list, and the funds that were available to achieve that project have actually been made recurrent. So the team are able to continue to access those resources so that we hopefully see that demand will stabilize. We are still seeing that demand is exceeding capacity, but that's a national picture. The referrals for ASD and ADHD are on the rise. And as I say, that's something we're seeing nationally across the board. In terms of some of the challenges, we've been supported very well by North West London to increase resources within the services. So we do have an increased number of staffing. Getting those staff was a particular challenge. So particularly in the neurodevelopmental pathways, that's a mouthful, that one. There are a number of specialist staff that we need to recruit that need to have really additional specialist training, and they're not widely available in the workforce. We have got lots of recruitment schemes, so we offer training now to staff who are coming in to say that we'll provide some of that training. You don't need to have had it before coming in, and that's meant we've been able to really plug that gap. Our vacancy rate about 4 years ago stood at about 40% in CAMS. It's now about 50%, and that's despite the increases we've had in resources. So again, we are filling the posts, maybe not as quickly as the demand is coming in, but that's making a difference. Tamsin also mentioned the £3.8 million that was invested into North West London this year to support those pathways. At pace, we've been able to partner with third sector organisations. There's a company called Helios, for example, that we subcontract to provide online interventions and online diagnoses for young people that are willing and able to access those pathways. And it just means it's a bit of extra resource to kind of help us churn through. So that's where that resource has been directed to kind of support some of the more simplistic assessments that we might be able to signpost to an online provider. I think part of what we've all been talking about is really the approach of Thrive. And while we are still talking about the tiered model, I think Thrive is really, really important in this context, because one of the things we've been really trying to do is help the system understand that the support for children and young people's mental health sits far beyond just the specialist services that sit at Armstrong Way. And you saw that map of services. West London NHS Trust was just one of those organisations, and there were a plethora of other things out there. And what we've really been trying to do as part of the Thrive model is link with those other partner organisations, find out what the offers are, find out how we work together and in partnership to best support these children and young people so that all of their needs can be met. I'll take you swiftly on to talk about the Tier 4 pathway. So that's really the element of the pathway that very few probably reach the threshold for, but it is some of our most worrying and risky young people. And really often when people think about the Tier 4 pathway, it's inpatient admission and crisis involvement, A&E presentations, for example. One of the things I mentioned that our trust runs is the North West London CAMS Provider Collaborative, which is the commissioning function. And one of the functions is that they are supposed to reduce the length of stay for inpatients and the number of young people at any time that are in an inpatient admission. And what they have mandate to do is, for the number of bed stays that are avoided, they're able to reinvest the money that's saved for the inpatient pathway back into the frontline services. And so what we've been able to do with those savings is actually invest into services like the Crisis Cafe. That's where the funding came from. We have an absolutely fantastic crisis team within West London Trust that supports A&E, provides a inpatient home treatment avoidance service. And again, that's funded through the Provider Collaborative. What we do find is, despite all that partnership working and the crisis work, we do see a lot of complexity coming through A&E. It's worth putting that in context, though. So in terms of the number of young people in Ealing, last financial year, we had, of the entire population, 25 young people had to be admitted to a Tier 4 mental health inpatient bed. This year, as of February, that number's 11. So that's almost half the number of children and young people that have needed that bed. And again, the Crisis Cafe coming online is probably a good indication of the effectiveness of that cafe, really. But the complexity that we often talk about and the rising demands often comes to a head in the A&E environment. So that rising complexity and some of the waiting times and things means that actually we are seeing a rising number of children and young people presenting to our A&E. That isn't necessarily because of their mental health, but because actually out of hours A&E becomes the hub for behavioural challenges and social care placement breakdowns. And, you know, it's the one place that's open and available 24 hours a day where young people can be brought to feel safe, and whether that's being brought in by the police or ambulance services or actually their families who are worried about their safety and their risk. Of course, 90+%, and I don't have the exact figure, it wasn't in the report, but 90+% of those presentations to A&E do not result in a Tier 4 inpatient admission. They are usually diverted, supported by social care or our home treatment service, or again, back into the community teams. Often actually after an A&E visit, they might well be supported by the Anna Freud service. It's just their risk got to a certain level of threshold that they needed to present, but actually in terms of the intervention that they need, it might again not need a specialist CAMHS intervention. One of the other areas I mentioned where complexity is quite rife is the eating disorder service. And the reason this is really complex is because it's not just the mental health element, but the physical health element that gets involved. And often we have children and young people moving between specialist eating disorders units back to paediatrics, sometimes to a general adolescent unit for their mental health, because what's driving their eating disorder is actually very variable. And often what we need, the input we need, is from paediatrics to restore their weight for height, for example. And then the secondary work of dealing with the mental health disorder that is maybe triggering that low weight almost comes secondarily. So it's a complex pathway to navigate. But again, through the Provide Collaborative savings, we've been able to launch in the last couple of months a new ARC day unit service, which is run through Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, but available for all 8 of the North West London boroughs. Because I think it's recognised that actually any young person going into an eating disorder unit often has a very long length of stay. And actually there's something about having a day support service and then going back to your community, going back to your family, and then being supported more in the home environment, but accessing the treatment that you need on a longer term in a daycare service. And just some of the things I thought I would just add that we're thinking about specifically in Ealing and just thinking about community engagement is Tamsin mentioned one of our priorities is experts by experience. So as an organisation, we've taken that and really run with it. So we've created a graduate service user employment opportunity where we employ those service users who've graduated from CAMHS to come and really advise us about what it was like using our services, how we can improve those services, and really get that voice of children and young people into the running of our teams. And one of the other projects that we've piloted, and it's literally just started in Ealing, is thinking about access. So while we're meeting our access targets, one of the things we're looking at is looking at the breadth of that access. So who are the people that are accessing those services? Where do they come from? What's their ethnic background, for example? And one of the things we're working on is we've particularly identified in Ealing that while we have a higher number of, referrals from the Asian community. You would expect that because one of the biggest Asian communities is in the heart of Ealing. The numbers aren't quite matching what you would expect to see based on the population. So we're working on a project where we've employed a link worker to go into faith-based community settings and really work with the communities to kind of help break down that stigma associated with mental health and help people recognise that actually there's a plethora of support out there. It's not about necessarily coming to the specialist clinic in Armstrong Way, but the breadth of services that are available to support your mental health. Because ideally, in an ideal world, really, in that Tier 3 and Tier 4 level service, we want to see as minimal people coming through there as possible. What we want to see is young people going through services like the Anna Freud and having the skills to kind of go out into society and be able to self-regulate and be able to manage what is normal variations in one's mental health, I suppose, and be healthy and able adults, really. So yeah, that's just a sort of quick whistle-stop tour of the services at West London.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to speak very briefly. Sorry, I'm going to just speak very briefly because I know we've going on a little bit about the Central Point of Access and Thrive program. So I think colleagues have set out some of the key challenges that we're facing. We're seeing growing demand, growing complexity, and also we've had a couple of exercises over the last few years where we've engaged with parents, and Matthew here, the chair of the Ealing Parent Care Forum, was very kind enough to invite me to meet some parents a couple of weeks ago. And along with those growing demand and those challenges, we are listening to the voice of the parents and what they're telling us, and children and families as well. And the kind of things that they're talking to us about are working together more, building on the strengths we have, but doing more of that joint work, of integrating our front door as much as possible, of simplifying language and terminology, and of really trying to fine tune the work we're doing. Obviously, we have been fortunate enough for some additional funding to come into the system, but demand is ahead of the capacity, and we have challenges like workforce. So we've initiated what we're calling the Central Point of Access and Thrive Framework Program, which colleagues have referred to, which essentially is responding to some of these challenges and responding to the voice of the families that they're telling us. And the initial phase has concentrated on looking at the 3 existing entry points for children's services, particularly the CAM, SPA, and the local authority entry points, and what opportunities we might have for joining these together, looking at potential, for instance, of whether we could explore a single referral form or other things that would simplify the experience of the service user and of the family. And even more than just the entry points, it's also about looking at opportunities for the using common language, using common responses to the demands and referrals. And also we've had some examples that colleagues have outlined of joint agency working, where, for instance, between Safe Evolve and CAMS, instead of if someone's referred to the service, but they need to move to a different service, parents tell us they don't want to start again. They don't want to have to go back to their GP. They want warm handovers. They want joined up thinking. They want services to talk to each other. So the example of the CAMS Safe Evolve Step Up, Step Down forum, we want to build on these strengths. Also, the report outlines the Young Adults Partnership Panel, which was a response to the fact that some young people were not making that transfer from children's mental health into adult mental health services. And then they were showing up later in life in their mid-20s in a crisis. So we established the Young Adult Partnership Panel, which has been really successful in providing a warm handover. So those are a couple of examples of what are Thrive principles of service, which are, even if you've been referred into, if a referral has come into the wrong service, we're not going to ask you to start again. We're going to talk to colleagues within the network, and we're going to do a warm handover. So that's what we want to build on. And some of the principles or phrases we're using are no wrong front door, working collaboratively together, and looking at a warm handover as a kind of standard response. But obviously there are many challenges, as we've set out in the report. We want to make sure that first contact, we know that when children are having a crisis or they're distressed, that's a really tough time for families, both for that child, but for their parents and siblings. So we want to make sure that first contact is, we maximize the impact of that first contact. So we're going to look at how we're, what information we're using, and we've got a website called Best for You, which has got, you know, talking head videos and some good content. We want to develop that content even more. That's part of the Northwest London Collaborative. So responding to those needs, because we're going to have to continually evolve these services due to this increased demand and increased complexity that we've heard about. And build on those partnerships, more work with the voluntary sector, more work between the local authority and the NHS. But I do want to emphasize that we've got a lot of strengths that we want to build upon. And one of the things I just wanted to mention very briefly, because I guess it probably hasn't been emphasized to yet, is the service provided by West London, the Brighter Futures service. So the integrated model where psychologists and other staff from the NHS work as part of the team with the social workers. And I spoke to the training department in the council a few months ago, and they said that this training and this work that is done is consistently graded the highest level of training across the whole training department. They continually get testimonials from the social workers and other staff about the excellence of that training. So that integrated model is something, these are the pillars we want to build on, but we're not underestimating the challenges we have. And even since the last reports in 2022, we've seen an increase in emotionally based school avoidance. So we're seeing new phenomena that we're having to respond to continually. And just on that, I'm not sure if Karen Gibson is joining us online, but Karen, if she's here, would talk about the part of the response to the emotionally based school avoidance.
Karen, can you hear us? She's online.
We may have run on too long. I know she had childcare. I wonder whether any colleagues would like to talk a little bit about the.
Interject. Chair, I just feel we've had a lot of information presented, lots of good information, and it seems a little overwhelming, really, that we're not able to ask questions as we come up with certain things. I'd like, to ask questions at the end is much more difficult because then you've got to follow the theme through. So I have a number of questions I would prefer to ask at this stage.
Sorry, I should have said this a lot earlier. I wanted the officers to present their work first and then for us to ask questions. I know we're on the last one with Karen because Karen Gibson is not here online. She's not able to do her presentation. If anyone else is not going to speak, and then we can go directly to questions. Eamon?
Yeah. That's fine.
Do you want to start, Councillor Wright, and then we'll take Councillor Alexander, Kingston.
I'd prefer to give other people an opportunity to ask their questions first.
We'll start with Councillor and Alexander.
Hi, just a couple of comments. In the report, there was nothing about FCAMs, forensic cams. So I just was wondering why. And it was interesting about the priorities. Again, it wasn't embedded anywhere about health and justice and the work that you were doing with looked after children. I think it's Eamon, you mentioned that there's more work that needs to be done with the local authority. Can you sort of give any examples of what you feel that needs to happen now?
Just to clarify, there is a short section on the psychologist service Brighter Futures. It's a short section in the report, but I guess the dilemma was, as colleagues have said, there's a lot of information. It's quite a dense report. So there was some editing needed to be done in terms of not being able to include everything in absolute detail. The other thing and I don't know if colleagues from West London can talk about forensic CAMS as specialist that sits on a wider West London basis?
Yes, so the FCAM service is provided across North West London. It is actually hosted by our organisation, and I guess it's an omission that it's not been included in this report. So it provides specialist forensic child and adolescent mental health input to those children, young people who are otherwise presenting through the Youth Justice Service and may have presenting mental health needs.
In relation to the question about what types of things in terms of joint work between the local authority, I've worked in several areas of London. I would say that Ealing has got one of the strongest partnerships already. So as I said, I think there's some great examples to build on in terms of the integration and of things like Brighter Futures. But I would say that currently what we're doing is we're engaging with a range of stakeholders, like I said, parents, but also clinicians and partners, to seek other opportunities for similar joint approaches where particularly around children with complex needs, where we know they're being referred to 2 or 3 different services, instead of waiting for the families to prompt us to work together on those, is to actually look at the depth of the information, look at the whole family's needs, and encouraging each other to pick up the phone and initiate that joint working at a very early stage. And also, just broadly speaking, I think we understand, and I think it's clear in the report, there's a lot of different types of need. Children's mental health is a whole solar system of different needs and different types of need that need to be responded. Some in-person support, online support, some support at schools. Now, that means that services are also quite complex because they're responding to a complex set of needs, which means that we continually have to look at, because services are continually evolving, we need to always be looking at making sure each part is joined together and that practitioners know about different services so that families don't get sent to the wrong service. So those are the types of things that we're focusing on at the moment. Perhaps Angie, would you like to talk a little bit?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks, Eamon. I think Eamon's identified most of, I suppose, the work we're doing at the moment. I think I just wanted to highlight, Councillor, in terms of you mentioning care experienced young people, is that so we're calling it Brighter Futures. That's where we have psychologists, clinical psychologists embedded within our statutory social work teams, and they provide an intensive service, mainly consultation with our social work practitioners and other practitioners to, I suppose, do it's like a team around the family, team around the child, to support the complex needs, the issues that are coming up, and to help all practitioners provide a more holistic service and intervention, and everyone sharing their different expertise and specialisms within that setup. So I think that's where that kind of forensic or that kind of multi-agency provision of services is provided within that sector of, I'd say, tier 3 and tier 4 support from a local authority, but as well joint in collaboration with health.
Thank you, Angie. Before I take a question from, I think, the next person, Councillor Mohan, I just want to, we forgot to introduce Matthew Jett, who's from Ealing Parent Carer Forum, who is the executive lead. And thank you for being here. We'll come back to you later. I do apologise. Councillor Mohan and then Councillor Kingston.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of needs of ethnic minority children, how do you see their needs and how do you try to meet them? Because in the report, I didn't see, unless I have missed it, any analysis or any figures. And my second question is that there are children who are placed from other boroughs for adoption or for fostering. Do they have equal access to services, or are there any funding issues? Thank you.
I'm happy to, I'll go with the second question first, because I think there's the national NHS Who Pays guidance that makes very clear that children placed in a particular borough, regardless of if the home GP has changed or not, should receive same level of access as anybody else living in the borough. So I can categorically say, in terms of access to our services, being placed here from another borough does not disadvantage children. They access Ealing services the same as any other resident. You have to remind me your first question. Oh, ethnic minorities. Sorry. So we have actually done some analysis, and I think this is a follow-up report. So it's a much more condensed version than we presented in 2022. I mentioned earlier, we've got this project where we have been looking at the kind of ethnic breakdown of where our referrals come from and how we can engage, particularly in Ealing, we've identified with the Asian community. So that's why we're doing a project to in-reach into those faith-based centres to think about how we can better engage those communities, to think about how they access the support that they might need.
Kingston?
Yeah. So I'd just like to know, what are the sort of specific issues which younger people are facing with regards to mental health? Sorry, what are the specific issues younger people are facing regarding their mental health, the causes, the root causes? And secondly, is it something which has been faced for your children from throughout the social spectrum, socioeconomic spectrum?
I think in terms of root causes, I think that's a question on everybody's lips. I suspect the answer is there's a lot of societal stressors, financial. COVID-19 was, our first major pandemic in 100 years. I think that was, a strange time for everyone. And I think that it probably loosened a few of our anchor points emotionally as a society. So those are a couple of things that would occur to me. But I suspect there's going to be some research in the next few years that could point out more. But if Colin share some thoughts on that.
I'm going to say, I think social media, I think you just need to look in the press at the amount of incidents that are coming from the result of kids seeing self-harm videos, etc. I think social media plays a huge part.
I think social media plays a big part. In fact, if we think about the eating disorders pathway, for example, that that perception of body image and all of that, that's just exacerbated so much more. Used to be what we saw in the magazines. Now it's all over Instagram and those things. So I think that is a major contributor.
And also, if you think about turning on the TV and listening to the news, you've got several armed conflicts going on. You've also got cost of living crisis and families really feeling the pinch of deprivation. And I think that has a massive effect as well.
And can I just add as well, I think some of the experiences that our young people witness to plays a huge part in that. So as we know, so for example, one example is their exposure to domestic abuse. And I think how that then obviously manifests and plays a part in them needing additional support to support them through those processes and help them understand and I suppose get through it.
And if you think about, there's more and more research on adverse childhood experiences and how if you experience a number of adverse childhood experiences in your childhood, then you're much more likely to go on and have mental health conditions, but also physical health conditions. And so the more adversity our children are experiencing now is going to build on an illness and conditions that need support in the next couple of decades.
Councillor Conte?
Just had a couple of questions. I guess just on the social media point, there was an interesting program on the radio today talking about this exact point, talking about sort of healthy relationship with phones, that children check their phones 200 times a day, which I just couldn't believe. I just don't know how do you even have time in 24 hours to check it that frequently? And actually how social media is affecting how children are creating healthy relationships. And I guess that just sort of feeds onto the question I wanted to ask about the schools team and about how you're talking about doing the whole school interventions and whole class interventions, about how is part of that about how the relationship they have with technology and social media and how they use that to sort of in terms of how they use that with their relationships. And I just think if that's a driver, in terms of those whole school interventions, how could that play a role? My other question about the bit of the schools team where you go in for children at risk of exclusion, is there a role, I guess, what is the success of that, in terms of how many exclusions are you able to sort of prevent with that sort of early intervention? And if it is successful, is there a role to mandate all schools that have children at risk of being excluded to have that to buy in that package? If it does help to reduce that risk. And then my other question was about sort of the Thrive model in terms of what the timeline is in terms of that implementation and sort of some of those other barriers. So sort of technology, for example, I know often lots of different organizations use different systems and how they talk to each other. I guess what are some of the barriers now to try and break down that silo working, and what's the timeline for that being implemented?
I can come in. Can you hear me now? It's Karen on the call.
Karen.
Hi. Sorry you couldn't hear me earlier. I wonder if it's appropriate for me to come in there, as a couple of those questions were related to the schools, and I can respond directly to that, as well as take you through anything else that you may be interested in around the school's perspective. Would that be appropriate now?
Hi, Karen. Thank you. What I would like is the question to come through, because I've got a similar question to Conti. When we finish the set of questions, then I'll invite you in if you don't mind.
Of course, that's fine.
Thank you. So do you want to answer his question first, and I'll ask mine?
I can try. So the whole, I suppose basically the whole school approach is, obviously we're very aware that there's one of me. I mean, there's other counsellors and therapists in school, but trying to kind of maximise the input that I can have within a school, rather than sitting in a room, like I said, there's only so many children I can see in a day. So we're trying to kind of think about how can we shift things, looking at behaviour policies, looking at, one box doesn't fit all children. It just doesn't work like that, and trying to have bigger conversations going into classrooms, talking about normalizing as well, normalizing emotion, talking about normal worries that children might have, and anxieties around transitioning to secondary, for example, exam stress, but also, of course, giving techniques as well, and trying to, even with the really young ones, kind of inputting into the social and emotional wonderful stuff that the teachers do, and just kind of trying to maximize our input, really. Around social media, it could be something that we do. I know that schools are really good at getting specialist services to come in and talk about safe use of kind of social media. So it hasn't been something that we've been asked to do that much around, but we do hear more and more about young people using things in a positive way as well, those such as using certain apps that can help with mindful. I had a young person literally this week tell me that he uses sometimes an app, a mindfulness app, to help him to calm down when he's feeling emotionally dysregulated, and it shows it helps him to breathe, and it shows it was just, and he said it really helped him. Or apps that help at sleep, bedtime, where they might use certain apps, or apps that track moods and look at triggers and try to help the young person with positive, helpful tools and techniques, rather than the ones that we'd like them to avoid. So we can try and shift it to a more positive use of social media as well. The other question, so the question about excuse, good question. I don't have all the data, I'm afraid. We're reasonably new in this, but basically, there's kind of a two-pronged approach. There's the young people at the centre who've already been excluded, where we obviously work with, and there are specialist teachers, and they will work with them across 2 terms, with the aim of returning them to mainstream school, with varying success, of course, but with a package as well that supports them. So the specialist teachers from that provision will go into the mainstream schools and support that reintegration, talk about what's working, what's not working, and also sometimes acknowledging that maybe mainstream education isn't the right provision for that young person, and supporting them to access what might be a more appropriate provision for them. The other branch, which is more me, is when there's risk of exclusion within primary school. we will go in and try to get the best understanding that we can of what's going on. There's often been a lot of assessments that have already happened, and we're trying to pull everything together, or in some cases, maybe just a misunderstanding of this young person, that everything is pinned on them being, it's, you know, this behavior that people can't quite understand. And I guess our job is to try to help to understand what that might be about. And then again, put in the appropriate support for that young person, make recommendations for school. I believe there's a system that all schools across Ealing have like certain points that they can use. So there's a certain provision that all schools are entitled to a certain amount. And then if they go over a certain number of then they need to buy it in. I don't know exactly how it works, I'll be honest though. I'm the clinician, I'm not sure about the funding. But yeah, there's definite amount of that all schools have access to it. But the truth is, yes, some schools use it more than others. But I think sometimes it's also about us maybe promoting it more and letting schools know more about it. But yeah. We also have a problem. We are not fully staffed, so we are understaffed. So again, feeding into the age-old issue of we have struggled to recruit into the post, so we're not at full capacity, and so we had a waiting list, which I'm very happy to say we've managed to get through. We've got about 2 left, but yeah, so we're going to reopen to all schools again to start getting a flow of referrals. But we have been. There was a history before we took over of understaffing, and therefore there was a build-up of a waiting list.
Perhaps I can respond to the question around the timing of Thrive. So the project is funded for 18 months, started just a few days before Christmas, so basically summer of 2025. And in terms of your second question about IT issues and barriers, so I've been analysing different areas that have got a central point of access or something approximating it. And there are essentially 2 options, which I'm preparing a draft initial report on. One is the sort of more of a big bang option, which is, you know, commission a whole new referral system with an IT system, with a joint record keeping system, which is obviously quite resource intensive. But what some other areas have done, which is that they have maintained their existing systems, but they've got a consistency of information on their websites and in their referral information, a single referral form, because most referral forms kind of resemble each other. There's actually not that much difference. So they've taken more of a step-by-step approach, because I guess at the end of the day, a referral form is a piece of paper or electronic paper. It's what the human beings do with it after the referral is made that makes the biggest difference for parents and families and the child. So that's what we're looking at initially is, even if we maintain several front doors, do we have an integrated lobby behind the front door and actually have the join up there, which then overcomes any IT issues and things like that. So, but as I said, I'm preparing an initial report for some of the leadership team to consider.
Thank you. So my question is to Dr. Syra Neve, and maybe Karen can come in this. It's similar to what Councillor Conti had asked. You talked about school exclusion and the risk of exclusion for younger children. In Ealing School, we've seen children as young as 5 years old being excluded with or reduced timetable. At what point do you come in, and how do schools make referrals? So I understand your service and what you offer, but I think there's a gap where children are not supported immediately. At what point do you come in, and what is the waiting list for these young children? You've also talked about undiagnosed children. What age were you referring to? And I just want to focus on primary for the reasons that we have a high risk of children being excluded with behavioural issue. And a lot of it is to do with, they say, with autism, but sometimes it's much deeper rooted issues. And I know majority of our schools in Ealing struggle with SEND, and there are lack of SENCO support. And I know your team come in, but this is the struggle. So undiagnosis, what do you mean by that? And also you said there are diagnosis children with autism that you also support or don't support. I was a bit confused about that. And I want to know, for example, the children who are undiagnosed, where do they go when they come to your services? And how are they supported before they're excluded? And I'm talking about children at year 1 and year 2. And you talked about complex needs. You said you support children with more complex needs. Okay. A lot of children that are at risk have complex needs, and we don't know where to take them or how to support them. Then what do you mean, and how do you support those children with complex needs? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try. Okay, so the only way they can come to my team's attention, it's a small team based at the Ealing Primary Centre. It's a school run by John. So John Hicks is the head teacher of that school. We have specialist teachers that are teaching the children who are at the school. We also have specialist teachers who go out into the community. But in terms of kind of clinician, there's me, and I only do 2 days at the centre, and then there's only kind of 2 other therapists there, and our role is around outreach. So outreach for children who are at risk of exclusion. So exactly like you're telling me about the primary age children who are at risk of exclusion. The only way they can come to our attention is if the school make a referral. Otherwise, yeah, it's down to the school. So the school will make a referral into the centre, and then we will pick that. If they're making a referral to outreach, so they haven't come into the centre yet, they're at risk of exclusion in their primary school, we will go out and do an assessment. There has been historically, before we took over, a very long wait list because of staff absence and various things. Like I said, now we've managed to get the waiting list down. I only have 2 children on my wait list. So after Easter, we'll be reopening to schools. However, we are limited in staff, and there's only not even a full-time equivalent currently working at Ealing Primary Centre in terms of the therapeutic input. So we would then go into schools and assess the children who are at risk of exclusion. It tends to be an 8-week assessment involving meeting with school, meeting with parents, observing the child in school. We would pull all the reports that have been done so far together to have an understanding of the child. We would meet with the child individually. So it's quite a comprehensive assessment, at which point then we write a report which is discussed with the family, with the school, and with some recommendations. Ideally, we then also can offer an intervention package, but we haven't been doing that because the wait list for assessments has been too long. So we haven't been able to offer interventions. We're hoping to look at that. That's kind of next on our list to look at, to reopen the intervention. I'm sorry about the confusion with the diagnosis and undiagnosed, but basically what I was saying is we get a lot of children who are undiagnosed, and we would then flag them as needing a diagnosis, especially around ADHD or autism, at which point then we would be looking to our CAMHS colleagues, obviously, to feed them into that system in order for a diagnosis to happen. We don't tend to accept children who already have a diagnosis because we're trying to help the ones that there's less of an understanding about, if that makes sense.
I'll see if Karen wants. I have more questions to that following up, so I'll speak to. Let's see if Karen is able to speak, and then Angie will come to you.
Hi there, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. Okay. So my name's Karen Gibson. I'm the Health Improvement Manager within the education team within Ealing Learning Partnership. And I suppose what I was going to talk a little bit about is some of the things that you've raised, councillors, around the level of need within our schools, and also about some of the interventions and the work that we're doing with our schools to support them. And I suppose in terms of the point made around interventions not being early enough, early intervention is definitely something that we're working with schools on around being able to identify those very early signs that something's not quite right with a child or young person. And we work with Angie's team and the SAFE team and our early help support teams, connecting schools with those members of those teams in order to be able to get social care involvement or indeed other elements of involvement. But that is very much our emphasis is on sort of raising awareness, psychoeducation of staff at school so that they can spot and signpost as early as possible those children and young people that have mental, sort of very embryonic emotional well-being needs. There's also work being done what you will have seen in the report, at a universal level, as part of the social emotional mental health review in 2021. The Ealing Council and Ealing Learning Partnership have heavily invested in therapeutic thinking as a universal tool for all schools in Ealing to access, which really is a philosophy. Therapeutic thinking has a philosophy behind it, which is really about being able to have a whole school approach, going back to Councillor Conti's point earlier on, that is geared towards the workforce, understanding and being able to respond and react when a child's behaviour is a cause for concern. And that behaviour within the therapeutic thinking model is thought of as being communicating an unmet need. And so what's happening within our school sector service is, alongside the interventions that you've heard of today, there's some really important training and development work going on to ensure that the workforce within schools are at a point where they can identify and respond and signpost children, young people and their families to the right intervention at the right time for whatever it is, for whatever reason the child may have a particular need, and also looking at their behaviour, systems and processes using the therapeutic thinking approach in order to be able to have a whole school approach to when behaviour is an issue. So looking at the whole school behaviour policy, for example, looking at sanctions and rewards and changing that, and looking at different ways in which we can support children who are finding things particularly challenging in school. So there's a universal provision as well as then the early intervention, and as you've heard from our colleagues that are working in the clinical sector. Yeah, I don't know if there's any questions around that.
Angie, do you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thanks, Karen. And Karen, I think she's identified what I wanted to also just highlight was that away from just Cyrus team, that there is a kind of a wide range of services within the SAFE team. And I just wanted to just explain, because we're saying SAFE, it's a supportive action for families in Ealing, just if you didn't know, which is a consent-based service for families on targeted interventions for any type of theme. A lot of our themes around the social and emotional well-being of children. So if there is, say, a team such as Cyrus involved, they may also be a family practitioner involved that helps to support the family and doing some more direct work with the parent and the child together. We also offer parenting programs and workshops on specific themes, where again we are working with the parents to support them in managing some of the behaviours, and then also coordinate what we call team around the family meeting, so that all the agencies that are involved come together, discuss what the needs are, and provide, look at actions and supports and timescales as well, to ensure that we're working towards the child's timescales and ensuring that their needs are at the forefront. And then lastly, just to say, highlighting, I suppose, around we're ensuring that our services that we offer are the community can relate to it. So we go out into the community, we do things online, and we also do things in our offices, so services, and we ensure that we have a diverse staffing group to be able to, I suppose, support and relate to our families and our children. And we also go out, work with schools and have workers go into schools and ensure that we're delivering parenting groups in other languages than just English, so that we're ensuring that we're reaching communities that need it the most.
So just to come back to you, Angie, sorry, I just want to understand this very clear.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. I understood what your team is about now. So I'll give you an example. A child in primary school got excluded, right, for behavioral issue, not diagnosed. Maybe the child needs educational healthcare plan. We're not quite sure. Where do they go? So this is why I want to know. Schools are saying we exclude this child. They call the parent. This child then is at home, and the child is 5-year-old. So then, how do they, if the school don't have the buy-in services, then how do they go directly to your services? That's what I'm a bit confused about.
Yeah, the child would go to the Ealing Primary Centre if they were permanently excluded from their mainstream education.
Sorry, not permanently, temporarily, maybe 5 fixed exclusion, maybe 5 days or 3 days. What support then are available for that child? And we know that child, for example, it's not just one child. It's general. This is the theme in Ealing schools with the severe behavioral issues. What happens then? This is where the gap is, and I'm trying to understand how the services come in to support these families.
Okay, so from a perspective of early intervention, what we've heard today, we need to get in earlier. And that's, I think, the theme from today. A lot of that is we recognize that. So we have a variety of services. One of them being the early intervention route is through our SAFE service. In the SAFE service, we support the family. We help coordinate the services, come together, identify the need, and help advocate, especially for families that may struggle, not know what's out there, or perhaps not know how to access what's out there. So that's ultimately, you come through the front door. However, there may be some parents, it is consent-based. So if parents don't want to access the SAFE service or that kind of early intervention service, we have our early help special educational needs team. And they do work, so you have you may have a health visitor, a school nurse, you have a team of inclusion workers that also work to prevent exclusion, but to understand what, if there are undiagnosed needs, what support plan, what other agencies need to be involved to be able to provide the right support. Not everything can be perfect and kind of work linear. That, you know, there's lots of crossovers, lots of agencies, that there are services, and we work to coordinate those together.
And I think my question, I will definitely send you an email, Angie, and I'm going to end it with one thing, because I want to give other members to speak, to ask questions. This is the issue. There's a huge gap. I asked this question. As a teacher and a speech and language therapist myself, I understand exactly what you both team do. But the reason why I'm asking this question is we have a huge parents and young children been excluded from school, especially specifically with primary education, who have no idea the services that exist out there, and they've been called to take their child home, no support, no telephone, they don't know how to get support. The parent then maybe don't have a good English or don't have a support. Is stress, lack of sleep, depressed, anxiety. Bring that child back to the school after 3 or 4 days, and the cycle continues until that child has an educational healthcare plan, and then families being promoted or supported about a year or 6 months later down the line. And I know there's a magnificent officer sitting in front of me, and I know the service is there, but this is there. And I've always said there's no point having amazing services and policies if it doesn't feed the need of those who I need, because these services are for those people. And I think what we need to really think about is, yes, we have these lovely services, but then again, how can we fill those gaps? Thank you so much. I'll go to Councillor Wesson, who's got a question, and then we have Councillor Baclini and Councillor Quansha and then Ryan. Sorry.
Thanks very much, Chair. And just on behalf of the Health and Adult Social Services panel members that are here today, thank you very much for extending the invite as well. So I have three areas for exploration, please. The first is about the transition, which Eamon, you talked about in terms of from CAMS through to adult services. I'm particularly intrigued and curious about what you say in terms of the kind of warm transfer. But more so, I'm curious about what that means in terms of continuity of care for people as they move through to adulthood. The second question is more in the education space. So we've talked quite a lot about primary provision. There are also secondary age pupils that are at risk of permanent exclusion. And I had one head teacher approach me just last week who said they felt that there was a real gap between kind of education and healthcare plans and potentially having to permanently exclude a child and search for alternative provision for somebody presenting with autism. So it feels like there's a gap there as well to me, and be really interested to hear colleagues' views in relation to that. And then finally, just in terms of the kind of multiple doors, and it really stems from what my colleague Councillor Rye was saying earlier. There is a huge amount of work that's going on, and I appreciate there's a huge amount of really good work. But what strikes me is without that kind of single point of access, we are making this really complex for people that are potentially not in the know like we are about kind of mental health related services. So you know, anything we can do to speed along that piece of work to simplify the pathways, because I think, you know, to me, Thrive meant something quite different before I came here this evening, and I think there's just a need to kind of look at that. So would really appreciate kind of thoughts on how we can really expedite that work so that we make things as simple as possible for people. Thanks very much, Chair.
Councillor.
Shall I kick off your questions? And I think your first question was around the young adult panel. And I think I'm going to change hats, really. So I'm going to put on my Ealing GP hat on, but also I'm the GP clinical lead for children and young people in North West London. And so I often sit on the young adult panel. So the young adult panel conception was looking at preventing this kind of cliff edge of care that you have children and young people services and then adult services. And I'm sure you're aware, if you're, you know, we've all been children, but many of us are parents, that actually you don't suddenly become terribly mature at 18. And certain things make you more or less mature at that age. And you may be very mature, but actually perhaps not ready to receive your care within an adult setting for some reason. So this has been appreciated nationally as well as in the borough. And so what we formed was a kind of transition service to help the continuum of care between children's services and adult services to prevent people falling off a cliff. And to appreciate that there needs to be maybe some flex around the age at which those services start, and that young people need kind of additional support. So it may not just be working with one psychologist, but you might need to receive some care through third sector organisations, through increased understanding about in your kind of college or university setting. And there's a lot of emphasis on kind of care coordination, kind of finding the right fit for that young person in terms of the offer, and extending the offer to more of a kind of social prescribing offer as well. And so what our young adult panel do is that they look into the CAMS or young person mental health service, and they identify children who aren't going to be able to be discharged by their 18th birthday, and they start working with professionals to introduce this idea of transition. And then that care actually extends up to the age of 25, because we know that people's brains are often very malleable and developing up to 25. They're really interesting meetings to go to, where the kind of whole person is looked at, and the young person sitting within their life is often looked at as well. So I think this is a kind of new area of work, and something that will evolve, but a really important concept to get.
I just thought it'd be useful to add just on the point that you made around warm transfers. So what makes the transfer warm? So I guess the YAP panel itself is manned by a small number of staff. I think there's 3 pathway coordinators, 1 per borough, so 1 dedicated to Ealing. But essentially what we do is when we identify these young people and they join the YAP panel, we have the discussions, but someone is holding them in mind. And I think that's the key difference. It's not a referral that lands with another service that is then expected to do something. Someone's actually guiding them through that process. If that service is not suitable, they'll find another alternative, looking at the voluntary sector and what else is about there. So it's about, there's an actual person responsible for seeing that transfer through, and that's what makes it warm, I suppose, compared to the former system we used to have.
Thank you. Councillor Bikini.
Thank you, Chair. My question was exactly the first question of Councillor Wesson, in regards to children transitioning from being children to becoming adults, and specifically because I myself have a child who has Asperger's syndrome. So it was quite difficult. We experienced lots of difficulties since he went to university. So it seems to me that there's a missing link between being at school and then suddenly going to university and finding no support at all. And it took a long time to find the support that my son needed. And it's such a pity because up until today, there is absolutely no support from CAMS. Like, I know that he's an adult now, but since after he became 12, there was no diagnosis, no follow-up, nothing. So I just want to know how we spoke about diagnosis and about the levels of support available to us children. So once the 6 to 8 weeks sessions are over, the follow-up is terrible. Like, is there anything that can be done in terms of following up with children?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry to hear about your experience. That sounds really difficult. I hope that the experience of a young person coming through now would be different. I really do. I also appreciate that this is an area where we all know we need to develop services. So what we're doing at kind of Northwest London level is we realise that the assessment process often takes a long time. So we're really working on the kind of waiting well element. So children and their parents are able to receive support through organisations such as kind of Contact Helping Hands and Ealing, but also the Child and Adolescent, the Centre for ADHD and Autism Service in Harrow. We've extended their offer, so you can actually receive support for before being referred in or before you're diagnosed with ADHD or autism. So the offer that they are providing for children and families is pre-diagnosis, which I think is important. You also made a really good point that it's not that you get diagnosed and treated. So these are neurodevelopmental conditions and not mental health conditions. It's very true, however, to say that if you have a neurodevelopmental condition, you're more likely to have a mental health condition as well. So what we need to do is provide whole life support for children with and adults with neurodevelopmental conditions. and we need to provide sensitive and helpful mental health provision to go along with that diagnosis as too. And I'm really, really interested in this area, and I really hope that over the next, year, 5 years in Northwest London, we can really improve the experience of the support that we give to people.
Councillor Concha.
Thank you, Chair. Against the backdrop of a leaked NHS 2021 report into the use of mental health services by minority ethnic and white patients, which found that 36% of young people detained in the highest level units tended to be, Black and mixed race children, even though they made up 11% of the population. This is the national picture pre-pandemic. I just want to say that I have 3 members of my family, a niece who has neurological developmental problems, and it was so sad because the school in Ealing let her down. She ended up self-harming because she was also a victim of sexual exploitation online, and I see a lot of youngsters, has impacted on a lot of youngsters. But my point is, I ended up going to visit her and having to contact the single point of access. She was literally self-harming in front of me, eventually ended up in, this is a teenager. This is my point. We're talking about children. We have to think about also teenagers. When I ended up in this hospital in Ealing, I was shocked to see this was one person. You mentioned 90% do end up not in hospital. Well, I ended up with a niece who ended up in hospital as a young teenager. She wasn't yet an adult. And I was shocked to see how many children of Black African heritage, youngsters in this ward. And then I have to ask, this is the question, against that backdrop, what work is being done to support young children, young teenagers in transition from African Caribbean heritage, to address their specific needs and also specifically around race and racism? Because somebody here has mentioned that there's a rise in mental illness amongst Asian children. Councillor Mohan, you made the point that you noted there was a lack of, reference around race in terms of the statistics, but there's so far no mention of Black and ethnic minority and African heritage children who are, the figures are quite astounding. So when we think about the models of therapy that are used, every therapy has its own particular approach, whether it's Freudian, whether it's systems therapy, whether it's transcultural. Some therapies work better with children of African Caribbean heritage than others. So what is being done to address, I think maybe there's more than one question there, approaches, and also the fact that we are seeing a lot of young people of African Caribbean heritage represented in these, mental health system, and they're not getting the support.
Thank you,
So I think we'll attempt a double-pronged approach at trying to respond to this. So I think you referenced me in that question around the less than 10% that do end up in the hospital environment. So just to clarify, that's in an inpatient unit. So actually we do see a number of people attending the A&E department and things like that. And it sounds like that's the hospital that you were needing to attend. I suppose my comment was more around the admission. I think there's a number of things we're doing. I think, first of all, the recognition and the fact that we're actually able and open to have these conversations. I think these are really, really important conversations to have. I don't have any of the statistics in front of me, but I think from what we've seen, we are doing analysis on the number of people who are admitted into these units. And I wouldn't say that the majority are from a Black African background. They're quite diverse. I'd actually go as far as saying the majority of people we admit onto mental health units are from a white background, particularly with eating disorders and those complexities. That's what we largely see there. From an organisational perspective, however, what I can say is that the Trust, West London NHS Trust, absolutely take this absolutely very seriously. It's not just about the children, but it's about providing culturally competent care actually to anyone who accesses our services, regardless of their age. As an organisation, we have pioneered, and we are one of the first NHS trusts to start consultation on an anti-racist policy. We recently won an award around that from the Mayor of London's Design Lab programme. And it's really about not just looking at the anti-racist environment for the staff who work there, but actually the service users who are coming in and receiving that care. And it's about really thinking about the underlying causes, the systemic issues and all of those things, and breaking down those causes and thinking about that. So it's a much wider picture, and I hear the problem that you're sharing, but it needs to be broken down at an organisation and a more granular level. And actually being able to focus in on the child and young people, regardless of their background, and being able to deliver care that is appropriate and meets the needs, both culturally and medically, for the population. I don't know.
Okay, I think that goes for our services as well within social care. And I was just trying to think of some examples, but kind of maybe more on a holistic level. It just echoes what Kaya was saying. I think within our youth justice service, within different services within social care, so whether it's the statutory teams, whether it's our early intervention services, we work on that needs-led approach. But I think fundamentally, it's also ensuring that we have training that is focused on recognizing microaggressions, unconscious bias, and actually making that mandatory for staff to ensure that they're aware and able to reflect. And we also provide reflective supervision to enable key areas like this to be processed and reflected on when thinking about the types of intervention, or even understanding the different, I suppose, themes that may be coming through within our children and families.
Councillor Wright.
Right. A lot of my questions have been answered, so that's really good. Can I just firstly say that I've really been impressed with all the presentations, although they were a lot to absorb. So the fact that this work is going on, I really welcome. And, you know, I have been going on and on and on like a broken record about children in schools being able to access mental health care services as a preventative measure, and I think that's excellent. But I'd just like a little bit more clarity over that. I'd like to know how pupils can actually access that service. How is it going to be made available within the school environment? And, you know, I know you talked about the whole school approach. If you could just explain a little bit more to me, because I'd like to know that it's going to be easily accessible for the children. They're not going to feel intimidated about accessing this service and so forth. That's my first question. My second question is to Dr. Neve. You talked about going into schools, supporting the schools buying your service, and that you talk to the children, you talk to the teachers and so forth. But I just wondered how much of a focus there is on the parents when you're doing that piece of work, and how you deal with any confrontation that may occur between the school and the parent. Because in my view, both have an equal role to play. And I've had letters from parents in the past about such conflicts. So that's something that's very real for me. So if you could just elaborate on that, and bearing in mind the school is the customer here. So how do you get over that barrier? That's my second question. Thirdly, Thrive, excellent. You say it's an 18-month project at the moment. What happens after the 18 months? I'm also concerned, and I'd just like some reassurance from you, which I'm sure you'll be able to give me. You know, we talked about the Better Lives Project, which I know very well. And we're now looking at Thrive, which is basically a very similar model. How are the two going to come together? I know we have psychologists from the health sector working with children's services on this, but I just need reassurance that the two are going to actually join together and work fluidly in a very effective manner. So that assurance would be helpful. And what happens after the 18-month period? So those are my main questions. I also, Chair, have a couple of suggestions for recommendations.
We can leave that to last and then you
Okay.
can comment on that. Thank
That's
you,
fine.
Councillor.
Thank you.
If I could respond to the question on Thrive first, and then maybe colleagues on mental health in schools. In relation to the Thrive, that's the 18 months is how long the program is going to last, but Thrive is here to stay. But the objective behind the 18-month program is to reorientate some of the service provision along key principles, which are further integration, and that things like the examples I give of the warm handover, building on the strengths like the young adult panel. That's a really excellent example of how we're really bringing the system much closer together, and looking at ultimately a lot of the changes that will be made won't be delivered by a program lead. The program lead really is to engage with the stakeholders, practitioners, parents and families, and then to collate that information. Ultimately, the changes will be led by the managers, by the clinicians, by the practitioners, because this is really about bringing a kind of an energy to the system that means that there's a legacy, a long-term legacy for that, rather than a stop and task and finish type process. So it's more about that reorientation and developing and things like skills exchange, which what I would say conceptually is there are brilliant examples of Thrive happening that have not been designed through a blueprint in Ealing, but have happened because practitioners have picked up the phone to each other and said, let's get together, there's a problem here. Or managers or clinical leads have identified a problem like the transition to adult services. So it wasn't necessarily a blueprint or a magic wand that has changed everything all at once. It's been an organic process. So the program really is to boost that organic process so that ultimately at the end of the program phase, the services are on a much more of a Thrive type of basis. Absolutely, and there's a long-term legacy for the program.
Councillor Crawford, you had a question? Oh, do you want to, sorry. Okay, I think Dr. Neve or
Oh, sorry. And if I could just ask, so how's that going to fit in with the Better Lives programme?
Could I just ask, do you mean the Brighter Futures? Yeah, that's okay. No, absolutely, yeah. So they're not in competition at all. Absolutely. I think they're quite synergistic because they're actually about providing a needs-led service. So Brighter Futures is about putting psychologists in with the social work teams to get more psychological thought within the teams, and to bring that kind of child mental health perspective to the work. So they are in fact creating a kind of needs-led approach, which is what Thrive is working with. So it's not one or the other, they can be very synergistic. Absolutely. Yep.
And what I would say is I think Brighter Futures, as well as some of the other examples we've spoken of, these are the things we can point to and say, you know, what does Thrive mean? This is an example of what Thrive is, which is that integration and that skills exchange and knowledge exchange, where, for instance, in the Brighter Futures service, children who are looked after are not waiting for services. I think there's an 8 to 10 day turnaround from referral to intervention. So this is a beautiful example of what we want to build on.
So your question, I think the last one was around parental involvement. Is that right? Definitely massive part of what we do. So when a child is referred by the school for concerns for potentially for us to come in and do some work, we always require parental consent. So we would not start a piece of work until that's been discussed very openly with the parent. The parent comes in to school to talk about the concerns and the support that's being offered. And so once we get parental consent, then we will kind of come in. We'll again have another meeting with school, and I will meet separately with parents before I see the child. So I will have at least 1 or 2 sessions with the family to hear their concerns and to try and kind of get a good understanding from them. Like I said, it's kind of trying to piece together the school's understanding, the parents' understanding, other professionals who have been involved, and pull it all together along with my own understanding of what's going on for the child to try and, as best I can, put in some recommendations. So a lot of the work is with parents and carers. Yeah. I think your first question was about the MHSTs, the mental health support teams in schools. So yeah.
I was just going to say, so I've noticed that the question was around sort of access and how are young people accessing it. So it's, yeah, so at the moment, what we've got is in secondary schools, we have an allocated mental health support team worker for the whole school. So they're dedicated for the resource. There's obviously per school, obviously much bigger schools, much more classes, much more pupils. With the primary schools, in order to have the maximum reach, we operate what's known as a cluster model. So there is one practitioner associated with 4 primary schools. So they do a day a week each in each of those primary schools. Without that cluster model, we wouldn't have been able to reach the number of schools that we do now. Obviously, with the additional team that will be coming online in February, it will still be the same number of workers within the schools, but we'll be reaching all the schools. At the moment, it's something like 74 of the 83 mainstream schools are covered. So we'll be able to cover those last 10 with this final team. So each team comes with about 5 or 6 staff. Into how it's managed. There's also a big piece of work that we're doing Northwest London wide, which is really around promoting the reach of the mental health and support teams. And there was a piece of work that was commissioned by Young Minds, I believe it was, that really worked with the pupils actually to understand barriers to accessing these services. So there was an idea around, can we take mental health out of the title because we just want to be able to access the service without the stigma associated with it. There were suggestions, for example, like, can there not be a room where everybody knows that that mental health support worker is going to sit, so people don't see us walking into the room and kind of out us as having a mental health condition as we walk into that room. So there's lots of things we're doing to kind of work with the young people themselves to think about what makes the service more accessible and less stigmatizing for them. For the improvements, so
Councillor, can you put your mic on, please? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm getting too relaxed in this conversation. Yeah, is there a timeline for sorting out how, this consultation with the young people, which I think is fantastic, but will there be, are you hoping that within the next 12 months, you hope to have these models in place within the schools?
Sooner than that, really. So the Young Minds model, as the consultation was completed, has been presented to the 8 MHST services across Northwest London, and actually in implementing the new teams over the next financial year. So some will come online in September, others are coming online in January. They're just phasing them in. Those teams are being asked to identify how they would meet the changes requested in the consultation when they implement the new teams. So some changes will come as early as September.
One more question for you. Is there any way that we can actually introduce mental health into the daily curriculum? Because I think that's a good way of sort of getting the message across that mental health is not a problem. It's just something you deal with. And
Yeah, no, of course, not quite the curriculum, but part of the whole school approach is also we do work on assemblies. We do exam pressure kind of type courses and things like that. All the things that I suppose otherwise can often be considered as kind of the onset of, well, poor well-being or mental health conditions. Actually, these are normal worries and anxieties, and actually it's how we self-regulate and manage through those that we try and impart on the children through some of that whole school approach. Something that I think is, I mean, it's interesting, the MHSD concept has emanated from the Anna Freud. So actually working alongside Safe Evolve on some of those concepts is really, really beneficial, actually, in terms of where the models came from.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. Love to see what's being done, in schools, the partnership working. I'm very interested in transition. I would just like to ask a question about shall we say, the more concerning the more complex cases where some of our children, young people, may be placed out of borough. I don't know the stats, how many, but I'd be interested in knowing, how you keep tabs on what's happening, what role you have, or what input you might have with annual reviews, what work you do in partnership with the borough or, out of London, the providers, practitioners there. And I appreciate this takes a lot of, takes an awful lot of work and expense and some cost. But the complex, these pupils wouldn't be in these placements unless their needs were very complex with mental health concerns. And so they could have like 8 years, sent at the age of 10, 11, some not even coming back for holidays, possibly. And so the transition, when they are leaving that school, they might be going to college locally. They might decide to live locally where the placement was, because there might be a lot of support there. But also what support is given, because you also mentioned that, which is, I thought was really good, that there isn't just that cutoff point from 18 to 25. Now that might apply in Ealing, but if they're in the borough, because they're still our young people. So a few questions around there, I'd be really interested. Thank you.
I'll start. I think that's a really interesting question, and I'll put on a different hat because I'm the designated doctor for looked after children for Ealing as well. So I guess broadly speaking, you're talking about two categories of children. Perhaps you're talking about looked after children to the borough of Ealing who are placed out of the borough, who then have a significant mental health condition, and how do we keep tabs on them and provide them with the services that meet their health needs. And then perhaps the other group that you were talking about are children who present in crisis and need an inpatient stay, and because there's only one or possibly two inpatient provisions within North West London, it's a national issue, and we're having to place children in a tier 4 bed outside of the borough, and how we keep tabs on those. So if I just take those two groups separately. So from a looked after children perspective, if you become a looked after child in Ealing, then your responsible borough is Ealing Local Authority, no matter where they place you. And my job as a designated doctor for looked after children is to work with health services to assure that the children who have Ealing Local Authority as their corporate parent, that they are having their health needs met no matter where they're placed in the UK. Now, we do know at a national level, the further you are placed away from your originating borough, the poorer your health needs are. And so because we know that, we do work really quite hard to reduce that inequality. And those children will continue to either have 6 monthly or 12 monthly reviews, which are kind of scrutinised at Ealing level. We look at those reviews and just check that we are meeting those health needs, no matter where they're placed. And we also have a responsibility. So if we identify that a child is placed out of borough and is not having their health need, either physical health or mental health need met, then we will commission local services above and beyond what is provided locally to that child if that service isn't meeting that need. So then you've got the other group who are children who are in a tier 4 bed placed outside of the borough. And we are working with the provider collaborative that West London is one major part of to think about how we can prevent children having to move out and be placed at distance, because it's absolutely tragic for both that child and their siblings and their parents. I mean, I can't imagine having a child with significant mental health needs that is then placed at distant, and it would destroy your whole family on so many different levels. So first of all, there's real work in trying to prevent that from happening, but we know it's a national issue. Then from my organisation's perspective, North West London ICB, we have the complex care team who work to establish kind of placements for those children. And we have a kind of a North West London positive behavioural support team who also kind of work to stabilise placements, and they do that both within North West London, and we commission them separately to provide virtual work for them. Okay, do you want to come in on some of these?
I was just going to say, it's probably worth noting contextually that, so I mentioned one of the provider collaboratives remits is to use the savings to kind of invest. So I think it was 2019 or 2020 Lavender Walk opened. I can't remember the exact date. So Lavender Walk is a relatively new 12-bedded adolescent general admissions unit, where we can take those aged 13 to 16 who need an inpatient bed. Until that was opened, it was guaranteed that anyone in the North West London area who needed an inpatient admission had to leave North West London. There were no beds provided in this area. So to this day, there's still no beds in Ealing. The nearest inpatient unit is the 12-bedded unit at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And that was because of the savings reinvested. As recently as 5 years ago, it was not uncommon for a young person who needed an inpatient admission to be admitted somewhere up north in Cheadle or Bury. We were heavily reliant on the private sector, namely the Priory Group, for all our admissions. That has significantly turned around, and with the 12-bedded unit in London and other units through other provider collaboratives across London, like the South London Partnership, etc., there are more beds, and very few people now have to leave the London area. It's only really if they need a very specialist bed, like a psychiatric intensive care unit, that sometimes we still have to send them further afield, like Cheadle or Bury, where those units, there's only 2 or 3 in the country, for example. So there's a lot of work into kind of doing that. And one of the things we also do is where we have young people admitted outside of North West London, they're at the top of the priority list to be repatriated if there does become a bed available back in the North West London area, again, making it easier for families to visit them, etc.
Thank you. I'm going to end with just two questions from me. One is for yourself, regarding, you talked about a project called Access, and you said majority of the service, the users were from the Asian community. Was that correct to think that, or you said something different?
So proportionately, we do have a higher rate of referrals from the Asian community than other areas of London and the country, but not proportionately to the population we have in this area. So
Okay.
the numbers are still lower than the population.
Who are the largest users, would you say, in Ealing in terms of the population?
The largest users of CAM services broadly are the white population. They take up about 50% of the population of our referrals. The rest is split between the Black, Asian, and other categories.
My next question is to Eamon. You talked about parents and families and the challenges they face. I just wanted to understand a bit more. When you talked about parents and families, how do we recruit these parents? How did you recruit the parents, and who gives this feedback? Are they from schools? Are they from workshops? And are these questions also translated in different languages? And also, I'm just thinking about the community across Ealing who gets to have access to these when the parents having voice in their children's needs.
So I've done a couple of engagement sessions recently. One was with the Contact Helping Hand, who are parents of children who have are on the way to a neurodevelopment diagnosis or have had one. And also then recently with the Ealing Parent Care Forum. So Matthew, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, I think there's a few issues that probably come up that you have a few.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very conscious of time. I understand there's everybody here that's worked with me must be absolutely astounded to have sat through 2 hours with me not saying a word. I thought you might have been, Tamsin. And on that lighter note, I will now dive into the abyss. But no, I want to start with a positive comment, if I may, which is I'm actually honoured to be sitting here with the number of professionals that are working on all these things right now. Sorry, that's all right. Okay. Because there is a huge amount of work going on in Ealing, particularly in teams getting to know each other and getting to know exactly what role they play. This has come about in relatively recent years. I'll give you a very specific example here. In 2019, in our last local area inspection of all services to do with children, young people, education, social care and health, we were invited as per the instructions at that time after the team had arrived in Ealing. We've been engaged now for the last 9 months in preparation for the next area inspection. Very much a part of that has been where I have been working and sitting and learning from so many of the professionals that have presented tonight. And I have absolutely no doubt about everybody's commitment to the improvement of their lives and the outcomes for our children. However, I represent families of children with additional needs and special, so-called special educational needs. We're a subgroup. We're a very, very expensive subgroup. We're also an extraordinarily diverse subgroup because disability, frankly, is not in any way discriminatory. And it can hit anybody at any time. What is so frustrating for me is to hear of all this work. I've said it, I'm proud to be part of this work right now. I always will be. Your question was about what parents get involved. Our role is to hear the voices of parents and carers, to feed that back to teams and to work to improve services. We do not deliver services. That's the key distinction about our parent carer forum. There are 163 parent carer forums in the country. We're just one of many, and I link very closely with all of our neighbouring boroughs, including all those in the ICB. But I've had the same conversation. There's a lot being done. There's a lot going on. We're incredibly busy. And yet we trip over ourselves from time to time. And forgive me for this, because having been silent for so long, my brain has slipped more than a little. Just notes, waiting well, which I thoroughly support, is still waiting. And waiting well is different if you have a child with a disability, because you're not just offered parenting support and this, that, and the other. You actually have to have taken a parenting program in order to access some of the support. So waiting well is not equal either. I'm sorry, Syra, I do apologize. I wouldn't mind, but I love that spelling of the name. you mentioned those undiagnosed with ASD that you wouldn't talk about because others are best placed to support those already diagnosed. Are they? We have these assumptions about what other teams are doing. Other teams are doing. Excuse me. The extraordinary work that Anna Freud is doing in Ealing, I think we mentioned 3 primary schools and 3 high schools. There's 68 primary schools, 14 high schools, and now about 30 additionally resource provision places. This is, this is, whilst I am massively, massively grateful and acknowledge how quickly you've managed the wait list, which we were overseeing, Kaya, that was a 3-year wait, that was a rolling 3-year wait. If you're a 5-year-old and you're waiting 3 years, I'm sorry, that's, it's crazy. So these are there. A comment you made, Kaya, and forgive me, this is not in any way a criticism, it's just an observation as a parent and a carer here. Notwithstanding Thrive, we're still structured as tiers. Well, that's the problem. Again, we've just got that problem. We're creating grey areas. Talking at some point about some groups were looking at 14 to 18, and we've just heard mention now for Lavender Walk, for myself, great, another transition point, another eligibility point. Lavender Walk, 13 to 16. How many my family cope with disability as a continuum. Your family, with the greatest respect, cope with disability or different ability as a continuum. And for all those that have experience in this area, I the utmost respect. But this is the point. Professionals, teams, and occasionally counsellors drop in and out of our lives at some point on that continuum. And sometimes you're useful, and sometimes you're not. And sometimes we feel supported, and sometimes we don't. And it's just an extraordinary thing. And working with not filling posts as quickly as demands are coming in. Well, that's the new waiting list that's coming, that's on its way. There's not filling posts, guys. You have, and this is where I'm sorry, this is directly to counsellors here. You have to make Ealing a better place to work than other places. Simple. You have to make it better to be there. In one of the pieces of work we did recently at the West Side Centre, professional teams were there, we were there, other parent groups were there, Contact were there, the Anchor Foundation were there, a number of others. One of the best things I heard was a member of the EHCP team saying that now that they have stability in their team of education, health and care plan coordinators, that now for the first time she's felt that she's able to do a good job, and she got great satisfaction from working in a stable team. Well, I've got to tell you, every single parent I know is delighted at that. That's what we want. We want people in stable places, able to offer support. And I don't care how much vicarious joy they get out of helping my daughter. I'm grateful. I'm really, really grateful. It's massively important. The rest of it just goes on and on and on. I mean, just the context of where we're coming from, and Eamon's work with the central point of access is phenomenally important. Tamsin's work is phenomenally important here, and is hard, hard work. But please don't ignore the fact that we have sat over, and I've been part of, a system which creates 3 single points of access. I'm sorry, that's an abuse of the English language, apart from common sense. And this is the thing. What happens in every individual family's case is we keep tripping into these grey areas that keep getting not only sometimes improved, but very often replaced with other grey areas. And we go round and round in circles. And it's so hard to find a way through. But as I was just thinking about all this and saying to myself, Matthew, please shut up. Please don't say too much to everything else. I came to the last page of this. Told you should never give out paper, Anna Marie. Apparently, the history of this, the decision type is it's a non-key decision and it's not an urgent item. Well, if the mental health of our children and young people is not an urgent item, I'm sorry, we're missing the bloody point. And forgive me for the saying that. But this is what was once described to me. I do realize it was once described to me as in an expert parent training program. I'm going to divulge some secrets here in a whistleblower way. We were advised when meeting with professionals to always adopt the shit sandwich. And the shit sandwich is going in and saying, how nice your shoes are. How lovely is your bag? My child's been horribly da 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 da. And then, but thank you so much for the invite. So at the risk of doing that, I do want to go back to where I started, which is I am utterly grateful and recognize the work that's going on, the effort that's going on, the effort that's being put in, Eamon, just in this one project for yourself. Absolutely recognize it, but please let's not lose track of, you know, what this is all about.
Thank you, Matthew.
Sorry, no, I'm
really,
sorry.
yeah, no, thank you so much. That was nice of you. We pressed for time, so Councillor Weston and I had a visit to Circle, and Councillor Weston's going to give us a quick feedback, and we're going to wrap up. So I do apologise.
Chair, can I've had. I can't see your name here because I'm a bit too far away. I want to thank you for coming and for all the work you do. We need to hear more. I don't know how we hear more, but with the kind of work you do and all the parents, and you must know so many families and the kind of services they've used, the good points, the bad points, you know. I'm just curious to know how we can learn more. This panel, I'm on the health side, so this isn't my panel, but they will be making recommendations. So for us to really genuinely respond, we need to hear from you more. So I'd be very happy if through the chair, if she would agree, that you send your own sort of briefing note on your experiences and what's the priorities, because we can then reread the report and look at it from your perspective. And I think, you know, I mean, I can see that, you know, you are celebrating the work that's being done, but we need to know more. And I'm finding it very difficult. All the information I've received, sounds like good news, but where could I, you know, it's a couple of recommendations. So why don't you make sure the good work you do is received, heard and received by all the councillors here.
Thank you. If I could very quickly respond to that.
Yeah, briefly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Briefly, thank you.
We became a charity at the end of last year. We've reorganised and restructured how we're working. And we will be reporting very shortly on a recently run survey of parents with all of the learnings from that. It's just going through the process now, and we're making sure that everybody is getting to see the most important part of any of our surveys. We ask people, are you satisfied? Generally they are or they are not. It's always the answer, but it's the open questions that gets all the detail. That's what you need to hear. That's what you want to hear. I'm delighted you want to hear from us. I will extend an invitation to any of the councillors and certainly any of you that are involved here in this committee. I'd be delighted for you to come to any of our coffee mornings, drop-ins, themes, whatever it might be. I'm just going to say that one of our neighbouring boroughs have a meeting every 2 weeks with their lead councillor responsible for SEND and inclusion and their lead children's services councillor. And that would be something I would very much aspire to, that this would be a two-way process where we could come and speak directly to you, and you have an open invitation to almost all of our almost all of our events.
Thank you.
Is that
Thank you.
okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you so much, Matthew. Councillor Weston, if you could please wrap it up as well.
So I think I have officially got the graveyard shift standing between everybody and the door, so I'll keep this really brief. So Councillor Haley and I visited the Circle Cafe. For those that don't know, it has been referenced a couple of times this evening, but it's a cafe that's really there for young children and young people who are at or near the point of a mental health crisis. Thought it was an absolutely wonderful facility, and it's really well used despite only being there for a short time. So I think that just indicates the need for such facilities within the community. I think we were both really impressed by the inclusive nature of the provision. As I walked in, immediately I saw the pride flag. Talked about whether young people had come with issues of homophobia and such like. They had. And were working through some of those issues in relation to sexuality as well as a number of different things. I really would recommend dropping by. You'd be really well received to see the provision. We were given a tour, including of the intervention room, which was brilliant, and they have training spaces there as well that are being used by organisations across the borough. I know that Nana Owusu, who runs the cafe, couldn't be here this evening, but I just think on behalf of the committee, we should just formally thank her for the opportunity that we had to go and see it. And I really do think that moving forward, it's absolutely a facility that every town right across the country could benefit from having, and we're really lucky to have such provision here on our doorstep in Ealing.
Thank you, Councillor Weston. I just wanted to add, visiting the cafe, one of the interesting was children as young of 5 or 6 were able to visit it. So it wasn't only for older children, but also for younger children. So that kind of inclusion for the community was really something that deeply moved me. And also it was warm and very welcoming. It wasn't sort of education like or school, like it was a different environment. And you can clearly tell there was a lot of details about, you know, the children and the mental health and how just by walking in, they can feel at ease. And I think it was really, really amazing. I personally didn't want to leave one of the intervention rooms. It was well done. It was amazingly done. So I think councillors and members, please do go visit, and you will understand. It's in South Ealing, literally a few minutes walk from South Ealing station. I'm so sorry, I know we're short for time, but I just wanted to ask the panel recommendations. I know Councillor Rai had her hands up earlier for recommendation, and Baclini and then Wesson. Thank you.
Can I come back to you on that?
Councillor Baclini.
Thank you, Chair. I have the following recommendation: to establish continuity of care and tailored transition programs that provide comprehensive support for young adults, and all this while including education on managing mental health challenges.
Councillor Wesson.
I think my recommendations very much align to Councillor Baclini's, but I was just going to ask for more information to be provided in relation to the transition service so that we can understand that. So if a briefing or similar could be circulated, it would be really helpful.
Thank you, Councillor.
The cabinet ministers do meet with the relevant bodies on a regular basis. They do actually range either bi-monthly, bi-weekly.
I have a recommendation, and for me, are you sorry? Are you finished? Sorry. Can I finish my point? I'll come back to Councillor Rai. My recommendation is not when we look at a child, I would prefer if we look at the child as a whole, child-centered as a whole with the family. And one of the things I advocate within Ealing is parents need to have somewhere where they can also be heard and be counseled and talked to and feel welcome. What we tend to forget as professionals is we normally deal with children, and yes, we say we offer support to parents, but when we do the diagnosis, I don't think any of us can understand how that parents go home, sleep at night while they have diagnosis, and some of them don't even understand the language we use in our reports. So what I'm trying to say is, let's not just focus on the child, but I think also focus how we can then support parents, especially when they have complex needs. And also, Matthew, you talked about parents and how you get their voice be heard. But I think sometimes we forget we also need to speak to parents who don't speak English, and also who are new to the country, who's also struggling, come from a single parent background. And I think those parents have no idea or have any clue of how to contact all these services. Yes, we do interpret. I know we have interpreters in Ealing, and we write our written communication in different languages, but there's still a gap. And that gap is because we're not really going to those parents who have no idea, who newly arrival as well, could be asylum seekers or children who are accompanied. I think that's, we need to bear that in mind when we talk about mental health as well. Thank you. Councillor Wright, you ready?
Sorry, just lost my train of thought. Haven't quite worked out the words, but I think we need to look at the short-term expulsions and the long-term school expulsions, because clearly the short-term ones that we are a little bit, we don't really analyze, are an indicator of what could happen in the future. So I think we need to take a preventative approach and make sure that the two tie in properly.
Thank you. And
I will give you some wording when I've done it.
okay, thank you very much. Councillor
It was just going back to sort of social media and healthy relationships and how that interplays both with mental health, education, and also public health, and whether there's some sort of strategy that can bring those three tiers together to have a sort of approach to young people and young adults in terms of how we can better use and more responsibly use social media and healthy relationships linked into that.
Thank you, Councillor. Finally, on behalf of the panel, I would like to say thank you for all attending this evening, informing us about your services, providing a comprehensive reports and answers to our questions. In particular, I would like to thank Eamon for the report and for bringing you all around the table. So I really do appreciate it, Eamon. Thank you very much. And I'm so sorry that we overwhelmed of our time. I do apologize. Are you going to be brief, or are we going to do very? Okay, lastly. Okay.
This is our last meeting of this panel. So just on behalf of the entire panel, I'd like to thank you, Councillor Halili, for all your hard work, your sterling work over the past year.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Also want to ask, last question, the panel to note the response from officers on recommendations. Thank you so much. Thank you.